because here's the deal. I'm going to try and respectfully, I'm going to attempt to respectfully talk on this but as briefly as possible. Dom was a close friend of mine, he came into my life. We knew of each other. We became friends very quickly. He came into my life at a point where I was very lost, and his existence in front of me changed me. He came and lived with me at the time, and being around him every day and him just existing changed me as a person. I was completely and utterly, like, I'd just lost myself entirely, and I was quite young at the time, which is even more confusing, an even more confusing time in my life. And he came in, and just being around him every day just completely changed my life. From the moment I woke up, he was already just so alive and ready to go, and I could not see him for a day and he'd accidentally moved to a different city or was just jet setting all over the shop. He was just this person that I thought was the epitome of just making the most of this, of just living in general. He just did just such an impeccable job of existing, and it pulled me so swiftly out of the hole I was in, and that's why it shook me. And I think a lot of the people around him, it shook us so much because we were young, which is a really hard time to you don't have a good perspective on losing people back then, because I'd never really lost anybody. And also he'd come into my life, I felt like essentially saved me without even doing much. He'd gone to work away, and within 2 weeks we'd lost him. And I started Crooks and I was so proud and excited because it resembled this new side of me and this new part of my life that I needed so badly. And I'd come back into myself, and the actual representation of him changing my life was sort of engulfed in this project and represented by this project. And it was pretty awful, but it still existed, and the idea of it existing was like a representation of how much he'd helped me. And we probably played one house show before he passed. And then so swiftly, his existence became my contribution to that band. And it wasn't long until everything that I stood for in that band was to kind of continue his life vicariously through what we were doing. And I just had this ideal of trying to live for him through being an artist, and not being an artist that cared about how they sounded or how good they were at their instrument or how they performed or any of that shit, but just an artist that would stand up on stage and in front of a lot of people that he was essentially scared of doing, and I would just tear myself apart on that fucking stage, man. And I just felt like I was existing for the both of us, and trying to showcase that there was a sense of success in being able to stand there and suffer in front of those people, because I had to be around in order to do so. So even just getting me to that point in my life and standing in front of everyone and being in the way I was and struggling in the way I was with his passing, still existing, became such a big part of the reason why we were doing that band. And it wasn't long until I couldn't stop writing about him, and the whole record became about him. And I used to walk out on stage with this big jacket that said "Dom Lives." It was fucking cool, man. I felt like I carried him with me the best I could, and I felt like at its core, and this is so important, I wasn't going to waste the life that I got to still have, that he didn't get to have anymore. And we lost plenty of friends along the way, and by the time we were in our mid-20s, like a bunch of our friends we'd lost, and I started to really feel like, fuck, this is a real thing. There's a real sense of fragility to life, and you got to really make the most of the time that you have. And I thought, you know what, I'll be damned if I don't do everything I can now to tell people about him, or to preach this ideal of just that if you're still able to exist, then to make the most of that time that you have on when those people couldn't be here anymore. And the reason I wasn't able to bring that immediately into Sullii was, or really speak about it when I started Sullii at all, was because it, as important as that whole thing for me was, it just tore me apart. And even though in the late years of doing Sullii, I've started to touch on that subject again, I don't think I'll ever be able to go back and be that person again that stood in front of those people and acted the way I did, because as important as it was for me, it just made me sick. I was so unwell from being on tour, constantly doing that every night, standing on stage and digging all of that up, that upset, that hurt, that like loss of my friend, while still trying to be brave enough to stand there in front of those people. And it confused the fans, because I never told them why we were doing it or what we were doing. So they'd be like, what the fuck? This motherfucker's just going crazy. But we'd start the set and everyone would nod at each other, and then I'd like black out, and we'd get to the end of the set and I wouldn't know what the fuck had happened. And it sounds pretentious as shit, but like, it just is the case. I can't deny the truth. Like, that's literally what was happening. It's why Crooks was so performative. It's why everyone just wore solid black, and we didn't have a lot of like band elements to what we were doing. It was never about us. It just became like a very performance-based like project where we just wanted to turn up and say what we were saying and get out of there. And the guys in the band, as you know, were very gracious in letting that project become that. And for 4 other people that didn't know Dom, it was very lovely of them to do so. And that's why I can't talk about it with Sullii, and why Sullii's essentially more lighthearted than that, because it was just the worst thing I ever went through. And I was living for 2 people. That's why the 42 has been so prevalent in my writing, even up until Sullii, because I wasn't living for myself anymore. And I just couldn't, I'm not mega spiritual, but I just couldn't. I've always felt like he's just been just like with me. And yeah, also just like loads of weird coincidences. That anytime anything good happens in my life, it's always a 42, and I feel like it's like some guidance or some shit. I don't know. I feel like he's like guiding me or some shit. Like I'll turn up at my friends' houses, or like if I get a new job, or like any career path or whatever. It's always that number 42, or there's always 42. I don't know. That shit fucking follows me around. But I couldn't talk about it with Sullii too much. I needed a space to be able to just speak about all these other things that were going on with me, because it was too traumatic to come back to, and I just don't think it would have the same effect trying to speak about him as respectfully in a smaller sonic space.
It was around the time he was living with you, I think, or just finished living with you, so he'd obviously spent a lot of time with you and knew you better than I did at the time. It's just the way that he was so confident about it. So I always like dwell on that whenever you talk about your career in general, but also when you reference Dom, I'm like, that's the first thing that I think about. I'm like, yeah, because he backed you and had so much. The way he said it was so like without a shadow of doubt.